Mirë se erdhët në Public Square, unë jam Ditmir Bushati. Cili është qëndrimi I Rusisë në planin politik, ushtarak dhe ekonomik për sa I përket luftës që po zhvillohet prej 3 vitesh në kontinentin tonë, kam fjalën për luftën në Ukrainë. Cilat janë raportet e reja të Rusisë me administratën Trump dhe si sheh ajo marrëdhëniet me Kinën dhe Indinë. A do të ndalohet Rusia e Vladimir Putinit në Ukrainë, apo ka ambicie të mëteshme për të ndëshkuar sa më shumë që tjetë mundur perëndimin dhe boshtin e vlerave mbi cilën perëndimi mbahet në këmbë. A mund të flasim për një zonë pa qëndrueshmërie apo një zonë me destabilitet midis Bashkimit Evropian dhe Rusisë? Kam fjalën këtu për vendet që janë në mes dhe që nuk ka një politik të qartë për sa I përket asaj çka po ngjet në kontinent. Sot për herë të parë në Public Square kam të ftuar një studiues rus, Maksim Samorukov, një studiues I Carnegie Russia dhe Eurasia me qendër në Berlin, I cili do të ndajë me ne pikërisht pikpamjet e Rusisë për atë se çfarë po ngjet në kontinentin tonë. Welcome to Public Square, dear Maksim. Let me tell you that you are the first Russian analyst or Russian thinker that are part of this program, of this podcast, and I assume there will be lots of interest to hear your views, but also to explain to our audience what Russia is thinking about the war in Ukraine. How is Russia viewing this war politically, militarily, and economically speaking? But maybe also how Russia is viewing Ukraine from a historical perspective, because there has been so much talks and so much speculation about that.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be the first Russian guest and a huge responsibility to meet. Okay, I'll try to explain how, I'd rather say it's important to analyze how Russian leadership views Ukraine and the current war against Ukraine. Yeah, because with the Russian state of democracy, Russian society, or Russian civil sector, or Russian media have very, very little impact on the formulation of foreign policy, and it's actually only one person whose name is Vladimir Putin, whose views and perceptions matter in determining Russian foreign policy and in determining the course of this war. And he views his invasion of Ukraine as an existential war, as a war for the Russia's very survival. Yeah. Somehow, his distorted perception is that if Russia loses this war, and for him a loss is to lose the influence in Ukraine and to lose all the to move Russian military out of Ukraine is perceived as a loss by him. Yeah, and he sees that as a prologue for dismemberment of Russia, for downgrading of Russia as a world power, for the loss of maybe nuclear power status and all other horrible consequences one could imagine. Yeah, he has attached so much importance to this war that for him it's either Russia wins this war, and this way it confirms its status of the world power, and it confirms its status as the country which can shape the world order. Or if Russia loses this war, Russia becomes a secondary country who will never be taken into account by other world powers. It will be marginalized. It will lose also economic influence. It will become too dependent on other partners and all other negative consequences. So for him, and he is the only one whose opinion matters in the current Russian system, for him this invasion is either everything or nothing. Either Russia wins and gets everything, or Russia loses and gets nothing.
What does it mean when you say that either Russia gets everything? What does it mean, everything?
Because in Putin's perception, a victory in Ukraine will have a huge impact on many other countries in their relations with Russia. That all other post-Soviet states, at least, they will become much more respectful to Russia's opinion, and they'll realize that if they don't want to repeat the fate of Ukraine, they'd rather pay attention to what Russia is saying, and they should rather follow what Russia is demanding from them. In Europe, also, Putin believes that this victory will demonstrate to Europe and to the West that Russia is a serious power, it should be taken into account, and its demands and concerns should be paid respect to. Yeah. According to this grand scheme Putin is having in his mind, that as soon as Europe sees how militarily powerful Russia is, it will immediately change its behavior towards Russia. Yeah, it will become much more accommodating towards Russia's demands. Yeah.
But when you see winning the war in Ukraine, you mean a total subjugation of Ukraine by Russia, a partition of Russia. What are the winning scenarios that he can sell to his constituency, but also that can project Russia differently according to Vladimir Putin?
That's actually two different scenarios.
Yes.
Actually, if we look at what Russia's society wants from this war, what Russia's society will perceive as a victory, actually, if Putin stops right now and do nothing else, it will be quite enough for Russian society to perceive it as a victory. Actually, the majority of Russian society is tired of this war. They are not that much interested in conquering Ukraine. Or they kind of support their country because their country is at war, but there is no strong grassroots demand for conquering Ukraine in Russia. Maybe, according to various polls, it's maybe 20-25% of strongly pro-Russian, pro-war Russians. But the majority of Russians, they are either indifferent to that, and they prefer to lead their normal private lives, and they don't care much about what's going on in Ukraine. But it's not about the opinion of Russian society. It's more about Putin's own idea what is the victory in Ukraine. He sees his own historical mission in bringing Ukraine back under Russia's control. Yeah, and this means, I don't think, more or less, it should be annexing part of Ukraine, probably the Black Sea coast and eastern parts, and of course Crimea, and also creating a pro-Russian regime in the remaining part of Ukraine. Yeah, it can't be only one element. It can't be just annexation of the territories in the east and south. Yeah, it should be also the installation of a pro-Russian regime in Kiev. Yeah, and pro-Russian regime means really very, very much pro-Russian regime, which basically limits Ukraine's sovereignty in a very, very severe way.
Speaking about the Russian population and speaking about their sentiments and their thinking, how is Russian society coping with the sanctions and with restrictions in terms of traveling freely to countries of European Union? What's your thinking also from the talks you are having maybe with your family members or with friends that are living in Russia?
Actually, they are coping much better than it has been expected initially. Yeah, there was a very popular expectation before the war, including in Russia itself, that the Western sanctions may be fatal for the Russian economy, and at least it will create a lot of difficulties for Russian society. It was not only like Western expectation. It was in Russia also leading economic experts had the same forecasts that Russian economy is very much dependent on the West, and such huge sanctions will create a lot of difficulties. But somehow it hasn't materialized in full. Yeah, of course there are a lot of problems. There are a lot of imbalances accumulated in the Russian economy over the past 3 years. But overall, we should say that the living standards in Russia have increased over the past 3 years, that the trade with China, India, and other leading countries of the global south has, to a large extent, compensated the loss of the access to the Western markets, that huge state spending on defense industry, on army, on various defense-related issues has created a huge stream of money going to Russian society, and people, especially in poorer regions, increasing their income multifold. Yeah. We see that many Western goods, which disappeared after the war started, were replaced by Chinese ones. We see that Russians started to go for holidays to, yes, the number of Russians who can afford going to Europe has decreased dramatically, which was one of the key destinations before the war. But now they are going to China, they are going to Southeast Asia, they are going to South Asia, to India, Turkey, and they are Emirates. Emirates are now very popular, yeah, and they are quite okay with that. So I'd say that of course, the war has impacted the living standards of Russia. Yeah, the patterns of consumption has changed dramatically, but surprisingly, even for Russians themselves, so far there have been no major drop in the living standards. It's rather the other way around, that the huge spending on this war has created a lot of like by-effects. And many people in Russia have benefited from this war financially, which very much contributed to the support of this war in Russian society.
So who is losing? Who is losing more from this war? Russian people or Europeans? What's your view?
It depends on our perspective. How long term are we thinking? Yeah. We shouldn't forget that despite quite high living standards, that the government has managed to sustain quite high living standards in Russia over the past 3 years, it's not a long-term solution. It's not sustainable. Yeah, we see that this huge military spend in Russia, all the money Russia investing in this war, it's on borrowed time. Yeah, that we see huge deficit of the labor force. We see Russian technological industries falling behind their Western competitors. We see brain drain from Russia to the West and other countries. Over 500,000 of Russians, mostly the educated ones and younger ones, have left the country since the start of the war. We see a lot of problems with industries which involve modern technology, and this includes like oil drilling, gas drilling, exploring of the Arctics and Arctic mineral wealth. We see that Russia is doing well, but it's doing well in short to mid-term. In 10 years, like Russia has sold its future for this war. Yeah, this is the problem, that yes, you can withstand the pressure of sanctions for a year, for 3 years, maybe for 5 years, and even more. But while withstanding, like in the attempts to resist these sanctions, you are losing your potential. Yeah, you are wasting your potential on this war, or on all the limitations imposed on Russia over the past 3 years. And above all, the technological problems. Sooner or later, they'll become very, very acute. And another big problem, which will materialize only in the future, in longer term, like in 10 years, is the dependency on China. Yeah. Before the war, Russia-Chinese relations were somewhat equal, but now the path is that Russia will become just a junior, inferior partner to China, dependent on it on a lot of industries and economic aspects.
I'm sure you have followed quite attentively the first moves of the Trump administration, and we are faced somehow with a reversed Kissinger approach in the relations with Russia. So the main aim is to decouple Russia from China, and I wanted to have your view whether this is possible given the present circumstances where, as you mentioned, we see an increased dependency of Russian economy towards China. What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Trump's priority is to decouple Russia from China, and for him, it's more important than the future of Ukraine. Yeah, he's ready to sacrifice Ukraine for the sake of decoupling Russia from China. Unfortunately, I don't think that is going to materialize, simply because the current US administration doesn't appreciate the whole depth of the connections Russia and China have established over the past decades. All the interdependencies are going so deep, they are so elaborated, that it's very difficult to imagine what the United States can propose to Russia to make Russia abandon its ties with such well-developed ties with China. Yeah? Russia and China needs each other. China is an industrial hub, providing all Russian needs in equipment, in modern technologies, all this stuff. While for China, Russia is the breadbasket of mineral resources, oil, gas, other kinds of raw materials, agricultural products potentially. Yeah. So, and all these raw materials can be delivered to China not by sea, where sea routes are vulnerable for the United States and its military fleet and navy, but it can be delivered just across the border. China has huge border with Russia, direct border, and these connections are far more reliable than going through Suez Channel or through Indian Ocean or through Pacific Ocean. Yeah, and this interdependence is so deep, and it has developed also in other spheres, like politically. China and Russia understand each other very well. We see mutual trust between Chinese and Russian leaders, mutual respect. They understand each other's needs much better than Trump can ever do. And moreover, Russia doesn't believe that Trump is a long-term leader of the United States. Yeah, they believe it to be an anomaly, something strange, something weird, which happened with the American political system, which may be in place for even for 4 years. Yeah, but most likely there'll be another election, and there'll be another president who will abandon this course and who will become again much more hostile towards Russia. So Russia and Russian leadership, which is thinking in terms of decades in this respect, they believe that Trump is just a too short-term leader of the United States to bet on him and to perceive his overtures in a favorable way.
So basically, you are saying that an American president, including Donald Trump, is bound by election cycle, which is not the case for Mr. Putin or Mr. Xi.
Correct. Yes. Putin believes that with Xi, he can plan for 2 decades ahead, while with Trump, he can't plan even for several years because, like next or in a year and a half, they'll have a Congress elections for Congress. And without Congress, Trump may lose control over Congress, and it will be impossible to implement any major changes without the approval of the Congress, and it will all stall. And so why would Putin bother with undertaking a very risky reorientation of Russian foreign policy towards the United States when he can simply continue the cooperation, very beneficial one, at least in his perception, with China? Yeah.
What Putin wants to achieve with this war in relation to South Caucasus and also in relation to Moldova. So basically to the so-called post-Soviet space, and what are his aims also in relation to Central Asia, where I see also a clear presence and a clear influence of China and to a certain degree of India, not of just Russia.
First of all, we should state that Russian leadership and Putin are not concerned with the Chinese or Indian influence as much as they are concerned with the Western one. Actually, the Russia's perception is that the more non-Western influence is there, no matter whether it is Central Asia, South Caucasus, or even Western Balkans. The more non-Western influence we have there, the better. Yeah, any non-Western influence is good because it limits the Western influence. And Russia is allergic precisely to Western influence, not to any influence. Yeah, it doesn't want total monopoly. It wants just the West out, because it perceives the West incompatible with Russian interest. Yeah, and in this way, the war in Ukraine should be very helpful for the Russian leadership to achieve this goal. Yeah, with the success in Ukraine, the Kremlin wants to demonstrate to all other post-Soviet leaders that Russia is a serious military force which will not stop from applying any means, including most brutal ones, to achieve its aims. And if the leadership of Armenia, or the leadership of Kazakhstan, or the leadership of Moldova don't want to see Russian tanks in their capitals, they'd rather do everything Russia is demanding out of their own volition, and they'd rather pay attention to what the Kremlin is saying. Yeah? That otherwise you get tanks. Yeah? It's no longer this like energy wars or trade wars, which used to be the case like 15 or 20 years ago when Russia was banning Georgian wine, or when Russia was stopping the deliveries of gas to Moldova. No, this time is over. Now it's not, it's just wars. It's just real brutal wars, which are a real possibility in the post-Soviet space. And also Russia wants to demonstrate that the West will do nothing. The West will be able to do nothing. The West hasn't saved Ukraine, so it will not be able to save you.
And speaking a little bit for countries in between, let's put it in this way, which are somehow under Russian orbit, but they don't fall exactly under the Russian geographical proximity. You have countries like Serbia, for instance, that did not join the EU sanctions on Russia, but on the other hand, they managed quite skillfully to sell arms and ammunition to Ukraine. You have countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina, but on the other hand, we see also leaders from within EU member states like Orban or Fico, that they are calling for a different approach towards Russia. So how do you see this arch of instability between EU and Russia having effects in practice?
Oh, they're already huge. Actually, the Russian message to all these countries, Russia doesn't, so far at least, Russia doesn't aspire to include even Serbia or Bosnia or Hungary into its sphere of influence, yeah, into its immediate sphere of influence. But Russia sees these countries as very important in terms of creating alternative opinion in Europe, yeah, and undermining European unity, and also cultivating more Russia-friendly countries within Europe. And for them, Russia have a different message. Russia, basically with this invasion of Ukraine, Russia wants to state that they should not perceive Brussels as the only game in town. That actually there is Russia who is again regaining its global position. It's achieving successes in Ukraine and may achieve more in the future. And when Russia wins in Ukraine, such countries as Serbia or Bosnia, they'll have much more opportunities for balancing acts. Yeah? That currently Dodik, the leader of Republika Srpska, or Vučić, the president of Serbia, they shouldn't rush to agree to European demands. They should play for time, wait for Russia to regain its global strength, and then discuss their relations with Europe on a much more solid footing, having Russia's support. The support of new Russia, which has won a war in Ukraine, which has demonstrated to the whole world that its military can subjugate a big neighboring country and challenge the West and withstand Western sanctions. And this new Russia will help other countries which are friendly predisposed towards Moscow to recalibrate their relations with Europe and to renegotiate their relations with Europe on a more equal footing. Yeah.
What Europe can do in this respect, Maxim? I hear Chancellor Merz is speaking about an epochal shift. How Europe can become more competitive in the world stage, but also how do you see the future of Europe in relation to the European security order, where Russia historically has played an important and indispensable role?
Actually, yes, Merz has recently spoken about epochal change, Zeitenwende. Yeah, but if we have a good memory, the same speech was given by Chancellor Scholz like 3 years ago, and little has changed since. Yeah, that's the problem. I'm quite surprised that how relaxed Europe is about, for example, frozen conflicts in the Western Balkans. Yeah, Russia has just demonstrated that the conflict in Ukraine, which had been frozen for 8 years, yeah, before the war started, between 2014 and 2022, 8 years has passed, and how quickly it can be reactivated and turned into major European war, the largest war in Europe since the Second World War. Yeah, and why Europe is so relaxed and it doesn't use this time to achieve final settlement, stable settlement in the frozen conflicts in the Western Balkans, that's quite surprising for me, because now they have time bought by Ukrainian resistance. But if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, who can guarantee that what will be the next aim of Russian foreign policy activity? But we can be sure that Russia will not stop on Ukraine. The confrontation with the West and with Europe has become an existential one for the Russian regime. It is a cornerstone of its legitimacy. So we can expect that there will be new escalations after the Ukrainian one. Yeah. I'm also quite surprised how relaxed is Europe about Russia's military successes. Yeah, that there are many politicians and political parties, very influential one, and actually their influence is on the increase, who believe that this is just a matter of Russia-Ukrainian relations, that this war is just about that. It's a regional war, very local, and as soon as Russia gets Kherson, for example, or Zaporizhia, it will be over. And Europe will be able to return to business as usual with Russia, again buy cheap Russian gas, and everybody will be mutually respectful and trade into mutual benefit. But no, it will not happen. It will not happen because the confrontation with the West is now lies, and it's the basis of the Russian regime, of its survival. Russian regime, Putin's regime, needs confrontation with the West for sustaining its legitimacy. Because there are huge imbalances accumulated in the economy. There are huge imbalances and problems in domestic politics. And all this will resurface when the war in Ukraine ends. And to tone it down, to alleviate these problems, Russia will need a new escalation in order to boost popularity of the Kremlin and in order to distract society from economic problems. And the fact that Europe is so much relaxed about that in fact that only 3 years after the war in Ukraine started, leading European countries are discussing radical increases in defense spending, and they are not doing it. They're in no hurry. Yeah, they are doing it quite relaxed pace, as if their time is unlimited, even though the threat on the Russian side is already very, very much real.
And my final question for you is, if we have to make this discussion, this conversation we're having in 10 years' time, as you were speaking in several moments about short-term wins vis-à-vis long-term ones, how would you see the future of Russia and the European Union in 10 years' time?
I think
cooperating, competing, challenging. What would be your thinking on that?
I think your description is quite accurate, that Russia is buying short-term successes with long-term pain by long-term losses. That in 10 years, Russia will be marginalized. Russia, maybe it will still be quite a mid-range military power, but economically it will be very much dependent on China. It will also lose the technological edge it had in several industries before the war, like nuclear and all of the stuff. It is also, it will face far greater demographic problems because the losses are huge, the immigration is huge, and in 10 years, Russia will have to pay for that. It will have a lot of societal problems simply because there is over 1 million Russians who have gone through this war. They are traumatized, and the state has no real solution how to reintegrate them into society. We already see a lot of crimes committed by people returning from the front lines. And and the Russian leadership is not even thinking about that. Yeah? That they are not even considering all the problems which will surface when this war ends for Russia. Yeah. I have little optimism for Russia's future in 10 years. I think Russia can be quite successful in the next year, in the next 2 years. But long term, its economy is becoming more and more dependent on several raw materials. And actually, even in 10 years, even these raw materials may become problematic because Russia's main markets, like China, are getting more and more successful in green transition. And will China need that much Russian oil and gas as it is buying now? This is a big question. And where will be oil prices in 10 years? Yeah, who will need oil on global scale that much as they need it now? And without oil, all this stream of military expenses, which is currently buying the support of the Russian society for the Russian regime, it will simply evaporate.
Dear Maksim, it was a pleasure to have you in Public Square.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.